Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of Farmers Market Fun. You're here with Megan Stewart, the museum educator for the Kamloops Museum and Archives. And just before we begin today, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are located on Kamloops Secwepemc territory within the traditional and unceded lands of the Secwepemc Nation. Now, today we are going to be making freezer jam. I've never made freezer jam before, so I'm very excited to give this recipe a try. So what you're going to need for this is 2 cups of fruit. Berries work well. I highly encourage you to head out to the local farmers market and get your berries from there. They are delicious. We've had all kinds of fruit from there this summer in our family. You're also going to need a cup of sugar and some freezer jam pectin. So I bought mine just at the regular grocery store in the same aisle as all the other canning goods. Do beware, there is freezer jam pectin and regular pectin. You want the stuff for freezer jam, otherwise I'm fairly certain your jam will not turn out. So we are going to get started. You can see I've got my delightful bowl of strawberries here, and I'm going to start by just cutting off the tops of these, getting them ready to process. And of course we talked a lot last week when we were making bread about women's role in the home, especially historically, and just the sheer labor that it takes to process fruits and veggies out of the garden, to be making bread, to be cooking meals. So this is another example of this. Of course, in the summertime, women would be primarily responsible for not only helping out with the harvesting, but also the processing of the fruits and veggies that were coming out of the summer garden. And of course, way back then, refrigeration wasn't what it is today. So oftentimes that would mean canning, making things like jam, and preserving this fruit and the fruits and veggies any way that they could. And of course, some of you guys probably live in some of the older houses in Kamloops. You know it gets very hot here, and those houses often would not have had air conditioning, so you can imagine how hot and hard work it would have been for women to process all of these fruits and vegetables. And of course we've made quick pickles this summer. Now we're making some jam. So looking at different methods of preservation for all of these different fruits and veggies. And of course, people used to eat a lot more, a lot closer to home than we do now. It was significantly easier to grow food than to try to be purchasing it all the time. And so families would have had gardens. Of course, we know in the Second World War, there was the rise of victory gardens, people growing food for themselves at home. So all kinds of different examples through history of people using what they have around them to feed themselves. So we'll go ahead and we'll just finish hulling these strawberries. Now our next step is, you can probably see I've got my potato masher there. We're going to go ahead and we're going to mash these berries up to make a fairly liquidy consistent mash. So the reason that we're doing this, of course, is that we're going to be making these into jam. Now with regular jam, you would also mash your fruit or put it through a food processor, but then you would be putting it on the stove and actually boiling it down with sugar and pectin. In this case, we're not going to be doing any of that. We're just going to be mashing them up in a bowl and going from there. So we'll see how this turns out. From what I understand, freezer jam tends to be a little bit looser in consistency, about the consistency of mustard, than regular jam, but it also holds on to that summer flavor maybe a little bit better, and it does tend to be a little bit less sweet. So just so you know what you're getting in for with this. So my strawberries are starting to mash. This is a little bit harder than I anticipated. So maybe don't be like me. Perhaps cut your strawberries into smaller pieces before you start mashing them. And you might have better luck than I do. Most of the recipes that I've seen for freezer jam suggested leaving some chunks of fruit, particularly because this jam tends not to have that thicker consistency. The chunks tend to give it a little bit more consistency as you're eating it on your toast. All right, so this is what I've got so far. You can see I've got a little bit of juice, but still some pretty good berry chunks. So I'm gonna just mash this a little bit more. It is starting to get easier, and hopefully yours is too. And do feel free as well to share your photos and pictures and even videos if you want of the jam that you've made this summer. We'd love to see them in the comments on this or on our Facebook page as well. All right, so I think that's probably good enough. So that's about the consistency I've got here. Still a few larger chunks of strawberry, but not too many. All right, so now I'm gonna measure it out, and just gonna set my measuring into a jar just to make sure. One of the things the recipe did note is that it's really important that you have exactly 2 cups of fruit. Otherwise you will end up with jam that won't quite set. So I'm gonna go ahead and here's 1 cup there. And I think this will be just perfect. I think we're gonna have exactly 2 cups. Yeah, so there we go. So we've got exactly 2 cups in the bowl here. That worked out nicely. But do be sure you measure your berries before you start adding the pectin and sugar. Otherwise, you'll run into all sorts of problems. So now we're going to add the sugar. We're going to add in a cup of sugar. So feel free to increase this recipe or decrease it if you'd like. You can do it with a cup of fruit and half a cup of sugar. I'm going to go ahead and add this one in. All right, so there we go. So 2 cups of fruit, 1 cup of sugar. I imagine this recipe would probably work quite well with raspberries as well. I'm not sure about blueberries, how that would go over, but please try it and let me know, because I am very curious about the business of making freezer jam. Now, of course, for regular jam, you would be putting this onto the stove. You'd be boiling it down. So the purpose of making jam is, of course, to preserve the fruit. In this case, for freezer jam, the fruit isn't actually being preserved. So the method of preservation for this is freezing. We're going to put this in the freezer, and it's going to stay frozen until we're ready to eat it. So I'm going to just set this aside for a moment. Let it soak up some of the moisture from that fruit while I get my pectin ready. And there we go. Okay, and you're gonna need 2 tablespoons of pectin. I'm just realizing I've set my tablespoon down across the room, so I'm just going to run and grab it. All right, there we are. So 2 tablespoons of pectin for 2 cups of fruit. So it would seem to me that you would put in a tablespoon of pectin per cup of fruit. And some of these recipes do also call for lemon juice. I'm not going to use any lemon juice today. I've seen some recipes that don't call for any lemon juice as well. So we'll see how this turns out. Now for this one, we're going to need to stir it for 3 minutes once we've added the pectin. And apparently this is the secret to having freezer jam that isn't lumpy. Now you should start to immediately see the results of adding the pectin in. Your jam should immediately start to thicken just a little bit. Should have about the consistency of egg whites. So a little bit thicker. Oh, I've got a leaf in mine. That's good. It means you know where your berries came from. So we're gonna just keep stirring here. Maybe chop up a few of these bigger chunks that are left. So again, for regular jam, this would all be boiling on the stove. You'd also be having to sterilize all of your jars, so putting them into boiling water and the lids and everything as well, and then sealing them. Typically that's done by water bath canning, so you put the jars full of stuff into the pot of boiling water until the lid seals, and that is the method of preservation. So this is looking good. It's starting to take on a bit of a thicker consistency. Now, I'm not sure if this will set if I put it back into the jar I used for measuring, so I'm going to go ahead and grab a clean jar just in case, and rinse that one out and save it for next time. But again, if you feel like experimenting and you don't mind if your jam doesn't turn out, feel free. So you can see mine's taken on sort of a glossy look as well. So what the recipe suggests is once you've finished mixing your jam for those 3 minutes, put it in the can, and then you're going to leave it at room temperature for 12 hours before you pop it in the freezer. Once it's in the freezer, it's preserved. That's it. That's all you have to do. And when you're ready to eat your freezer jam, you simply take it out, let it thaw. It'll probably take about 24 hours in the fridge, and then freezer jam will keep for about a week in the fridge. So remember that, and don't take out all your freezer jam at once, or else you'll have to give lots away to your neighbors. Alright, so we are almost done here. I think it's been about 3 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my jam jar here, and I'm going to pour in my mixture. So you can see it's not got really that grainy texture anymore. The sugar's all absorbed in, the pectin as well. So it should, after the 12 hours sitting at room temperature, it should totally set almost as much as it's going to once you pop it into the freezer. So we'll see how this works out. Of course, this one looks like it's going to be just a little bit too full here, so I might pour some into this jar as well. Maybe we'll see how both turn out. Remember that freezing liquids will expand, so don't fill your jam jar right up to the top. You want to make sure you leave a little bit of space at the top, otherwise your jam will expand and your glass will break, and you will have a mess in your freezer, which is not fun for anybody. So there we go. We've got our jar and a little bit of jam. I'm so excited to see how this turns out, and I'm really excited to hear about yours. So please do feel free to share your photos when you're all finished your freezer jam. And thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.